So it's actually been 7 whole years since Resident Evil 7 came out, and I thought, why not do a retrospective on it now? I say recently as recording this video, or as recording the gameplay for this video, platinumed the game, and I thought, why not just do a retrospective on Resident Evil 7? So starting off, I want to talk a little about the story of Resident Evil 7. Now, you play as Ethan Winters, who we'll get into maybe at some other point, or maybe I should get into now, but he's an awful protagonist, and I have no interest in him, but I also want to talk about that a little later on. But I do think his voice acting, the way he reacts to things, you know what, I think we should talk about it now. I was going to wait till I spoke about audio specifically for the voice acting, but I'll speak about it now. I think Ethan Winters is a terrible character. The idea isn't bad itself. Somebody like an everyman kind of thing, going to somewhere and having these horrific events happen, instead of being like really OP Chris Redfield or Leon Kennedy, like that sort of stuff, is a cool idea. But the actual execution was absolutely abhorrent, in my opinion. It's so bad. It doesn't ruin the game, but it could have been so much better. I think Ethan Winters is a very bad character. He gets his arm chopped off. He has no reaction. Mia's not much better, his girlfriend that he's actually going to try to find. She's been missing for 3 years, and he goes to try to find her and ends up going to this house where horrible stuff's happening, and she has something to do with it. But I think she's also not a particularly interesting character. A lot better than Ethan, simply because of how poor. I don't know if for Ethan it's a script or the voice acting. I think it's probably a bit of both, but I just find him to be very terrible as a character. But Mia is not particularly interesting. The people, she's just an average. She's not as bad as Ethan, but she's not particularly special. The one that really steals the show for me would be the Bakers. Jack especially is absolutely just, I love him so much. He's such a brilliant antagonist. And Marguerite is also a solid antagonist. I wouldn't quite say the level of Jack. If Jack's a 10, she's a 9, do you know what I mean? But she's very good as well. Lucas, who's their son, who's another antagonist. And you actually fight them in that order. You fight Jack, then Marguerite, then Lucas, and then you actually have another Jack fight after that. But generally it's Jack, Marguerite, Lucas. And I genuinely think Lucas is a big step down, but he's still not too bad. He's still a lot better than Mia. Mia, your girlfriend, actually does get possessed throughout the game and is an antagonist for a part of the game as well. But she's nowhere near as interesting as anyone else, although she has a really cool scare. Now, later on in the game, that you can branch the story. There's like a branch in the story. It's the only choice you really have. Well, it is actually the only choice you have for the entire story, where you choose to save, like, you've got this serum that will save one of these two people, and it will either save your girlfriend Mia, who I didn't choose the first time, or Zoe, who's the daughters of her possessed parents, because they're crazy, but they don't want to be. They've been possessed by, we'll get into that in a moment, but they've been possessed by this like girl, and I'll explain it in a moment. So I chose Zoe. Zoe was just the obvious choice. Why would I save the girlfriend who lied to me about working on a secret project because she was part of it? And I don't know, and she also tried to kill you, albeit she was possessed, so I picked Zoe. But it changes, the only thing this changes, literally everything plays out the exact same from here on out. The only thing that changes is you have a mini fight with Mia at the end, and I just think it's so stupid. It makes absolutely no sense to have this branching path. Just have us only be able to, because we know the canon option is saving Mia, because that's just, there's a DLC that confirms it, and also because of Resident Evil 8 that comes after, we know it. We know the canon decision. I do dislike this in games where they just have choices that are absolutely meaningless. Like, it's actually pointless to have this choice. There is no rhyme or reason to have it. Speaking of Zoe, I do think she's rather well done. She's not a great character, like I said, but she's like the daughter of this possessed family, and she speaks to you on the phone, and then you see her for the first time in person pretty much when you're going to cure her. And I don't know, I just find her to be relatively interesting to an extent, like how she survived. Like, I think it's 3 years since her family got possessed or whatever. So, but later on in the game, you were introduced to Evelyn, who's like a ghost girl. Like, you get little hints towards her, but she's properly revealed at some point to be like this ghost. It's not even a ghost, like a hallucination making little girl who only wants a family. I just think she's the worst. I genuinely think she's even worse than Ethan. I just think if you had this game be a bioweapon, kind of like old Resident Evil, where it was like a virus or bioweapon or something that got released, and then turned the Baker family, the family that Jack, Marguerite, and all that are from, if they turned them evil or something, that would have been much more interesting than this like girl who's a bioweapon. She's a bioweapon. Mia was working with that team, and she like froze up this black gunk, and it's called mold or something, and it will infect people and take over them, and it just seems so silly. Like, even for Resident Evil standards, I would have just preferred if the bakers, like some bioweapon got released and the bakers turned horrible, instead of having it explained by a little girl named Evelyn. And then it actually turns out towards the end that the girl was actually, like, throughout the game you actually see a grandma throughout the house, who never talks. She just looks at you, and sometimes she'll appear at random places, and it turns out Evelyn was that grandma the entire time. And you do get a little hint towards that at the beginning with like a picture that says E on it, which is for E for like Evelyn, and it's got the grandma on it. So it's a little bit of a hint, a very bad hint, but it's a hint. But it's just stupid. I wouldn't necessarily say it comes out of nowhere. It's just, I preferred the early game where you had to speculate on what was causing this, or maybe you just thought, oh, they're just crazy kind of thing, instead of, oh, they're possessed by a little girl. And it just, I would have I preferred speculation towards the start of the game when I first played it. Obviously, I played it many a times, but I just feel like Evelyn is just a really, really poor character. I'm not particularly fond of her. Every scene she's in, I think, is worse because she's in it. I'm not a big fan of Evelyn at all. Also, towards the end of the game, there's a room, speaking of the story, that just has lore dump in it, and I hate this. And this is the same thing. It seems to be a consistent thing, because although I'm not going to talk about it, of course, at least in depth, in Resident Evil 8, they have the exact, so the one that's set, actually, it's a sequel to this game. They have the exact same thing, and I hope this isn't going to be in Resident Evil 9 or multiple other Resident Evils, is that they just have a room that's, like, I'm just referring it to as the lore dump room, where there's a room that has like 5 notes in it or files in it, and it just lore dumps you. It just, like, that one room explains like all of the lore. It'll explain to you what Evelyn actually is. It'll explain to you how it affects a host and all. It's like, tell me it throughout the story slowly but surely. Don't just I hate when they just lore dump you. Very rarely, and it's not even lore dumped in terms of some dialogue or something. It's just text. So you've just got to read this text. If you skip this text, you will not know the story nearly as well. So you should read it, especially your first time playing it. But it just, I hate just a room that lore dumps you. I would prefer if they told it more slowly but surely throughout the story, instead of just dumping it on you in text all at once. It's just, I dislike that. It's a lore dumping room. They have it in the next Resident Evil as well, so I'm hoping in future installments they do not have it. Now, going into gameplay, the biggest difference between this one and previous Resident Evil games, and this was actually my first Resident Evil game, so I'm more used to this than I am the others, to be fair, is the first-person POV. I've heard a lot of people say that it isn't Resident Evil because of this, but could you not argue that Resident Evil 4 isn't Resident Evil because of the over-the-shoulder camera instead of like a fixed camera perspective? Like, this, I think this game would struggle to not be first-person. For the next game, for Resident Evil 8, they actually came out with a DLC that made you be able to play the game in third-person, but for that game it is okay. For Resident Evil 7, like, people have modded it, of course, to have a third-person, but it seems very, very difficult. I feel like the game should be in first person. It was made for first person, and I think it's done very well in first person. I genuinely do enjoy it. The weapons you find throughout the game as well are relatively fine. It would have been nice if there were a few more weapons. You can get 2 pistols, a magnum. You can get a pistol for completing the game, so 3 pistols overall you can get, but only 1 after the story. And then you can get 2 types of shotgun, a magnum, a grenade launcher, and that's really about it. Besides a flamethrower, you can also get a flamethrower, but the flamethrower is utterly useless. There's one section with Marguerite in which she has like a load of, like, her whole thing is she has bugs, and, you know, they attack you, right? Like, she's basically a bug whisperer. Like, the flamethrower is introduced in her section, and it's meant to be good for the bugs and stuff, and it's not even that good for them. Like, it should be a lot better for them, I think. Like, it still could take you like 100 fuel to just destroy one nest, especially on Madhouse, which is the hardest difficulty, and if you know the game, you know that's quite a lot. However, the flamethrower is only useful, and I don't even think it's that useful, to be fair, but it's only useful in that section. The only times it's ever even remotely useful is if you're trying to get rid of, like, these flies that are like, they fly at you from the air. There's like a bunch of them cooped up, or not cooped up, grouped up, sorry. And if you shoot the flamethrower into them, that's the easiest, quickest, best way to get rid of them. But that's the only time the flamethrower is ever useful, and that stops happening right after Marguerite's section. It's only Marguerite's section that happens. So literally, once you beat Marguerite, which is only halfway, if even halfway through the game, the rest of the game, you will not use a flamethrower. It's so pointless to have as a weapon. I feel like they should have made it a bit better. I'm not saying make it overpowered, but it just seems so terrible. Even with just normal enemies, bog standard enemies, it's absolutely abhorrently bad. I also dislike how there's only one skippable cutscene throughout the entire game. Well, besides the end credits, if you count that, but I'm not counting the end credits. But there's only one skippable cutscene throughout the entire game, every single cutscene, and they actually rectified this in Resident Evil 8, where every cutscene pretty much, if not, is skippable. But I just I had to platinum this game. I had to play it 3 times, once on normal, easy, and Madhouse difficulty, and every single time I had to play it, I had to watch every single cutscene. It was just so annoying to have to watch cutscene after cutscene after cutscene that you've seen a million times. And I've played Resident Evil 7 like a million times already. So this would have been like at least my 15th or so time going through the game. So I've seen these cutscenes more than I care to remember. Maybe my first time playing it, I might have rewatched them just because. But after your third playthrough, you have to go through every single cutscene. There's a cutscene at the start that takes literally about 2.5, 3 minutes just to get you into the game, like just to introduce you to the game, and it's completely unskippable for no reason, really. It really, really annoys me. And then the early game also has a lot of like time wasting. Like if you're all playing for the first time, like I think that's absolutely fine. But for someone, if you're replaying the game, which you do need to replay this game at least 3 times to get the platinum, but if you're replaying this game, which a lot of people would want to do, especially with a Resident Evil game that they've spent however much money on, if you want to replay the game, the early section's so unreplayable, if you know what I mean. I mean, I did get through it, of course, because I platinumed it, but it's so, compared to like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, like it's just so boring. The game is also riddled with these, well, I say riddled, it only happens twice that I've written down here, but it happens twice in the game where there's an absolute pointless interaction where the game tells you, click this button to do something. One of the ones in your final boss fight with Jack, you have to inject him with a serum and to like stop him, and it tells you press X to inject. Why? Just have it in a cutscene. I don't, like, it doesn't add to the gameplay. It just seems silly. And also later on in the game, there's a camera that you can look at, and you've got to click to change the camera. But all you do is click one button. Like, why don't you just have it be in a cutscene? Like, I know I complained about cutscenes, but this pretty much is just a playable cutscene. Like, it's pointless. I think there should also be more stuff you can craft, especially ammo types. You can only craft handgun ammo and enhanced handgun ammo. You can't craft shotgun ammo. You can't craft a special shotgun ammo. You can craft grenade and flamethrower. You can't craft shotgun for some reason. I have no idea why. You can't craft magnum. I just feel like being able to craft these things, and you might say, well, with the stuff you can use, like the craftable stuff, it doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't really make much sense. Isn't it like chem fluid and gunpowder makes a bullet or something? That doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't have to. I just feel like the fact that you can't even make shotgun ammo is a bit silly, but you know, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. It's just a bit, you know, there's a section really early on where Jack is like stalking you. Like he's a stalker type enemy, like a Mr. X, if you know that, or Lady Dimitrescu. And he's my favourite of all of them by far. He's the best. His little one-liners, the way he can jump scare the player, the way he stalks it and it's a really tight and closed space. I think he's really, really well done. He's a really scary character, especially your first time playing. But even on multiple playthroughs, you're like, will he be around this corner? Yada, yada, yada. However, this section is not long enough. I feel like, especially if you've played the game before, but even if you haven't, like if this is your first time playing, it'll probably only be at absolute most, it'll be 30 minutes. But even then, I don't even think it'd be that long. So his stalker sections are, which there's kind of 2. I mean, one's literally a tiny little section, like literally it's minutes, and then the main one where he's a main stalker stops as soon as you beat him in the boss fight, which if you know what you're doing is quite quick. Like obviously if it's not your first time, or if it is, sorry, your first time playing it, it will be stalking you longer because you won't know what to do. I do think this is something that isn't long enough, personally. I know it seems like I've complained a lot about the gameplay, and to be fair, I'm a bit surprised myself. I replayed the game and I had fond memories of Resident Evil 7. I play it like once a year at least. Getting onto the visuals of the game, the very first like outside environment, like the first time you pull up as Ethan to the crib, to the family's residence, I think that it looks really, really cool. It's like the daytime, because obviously it makes sense. You'd go in the day, you wouldn't go at night. He eventually gets knocked out by Jack and then wakes up at nighttime, so that's why it's nighttime throughout the game. But I think this environment looks really, really nice. For a game that came out in 2017, it looks very, very good. But even for now standards, like I think it's easily playable for somebody who only likes graphics that look photorealistic or really good. When it comes to the faces of some of the characters in the game, so well, pretty much every character in the game, especially though Marguerite, I noticed it with, but all the characters, they do look a little off. There's some that are way worse than others, like Marguerite is way worse than Jack, and Jack's probably a little worse maybe than Lucas, although I'm not sure. Mia's hair is a bit peculiar. There are little peculiarities, like uncanny valley parts with some of these characters, Evelyn as well. But I do think that overall, the visuals as a whole of the actual world there's more positives than negatives to take with the visuals. It looks realistically horrible. Like, the place looks lived in, but disgusting. It doesn't look like stuff's just thrown together like, oh, that looks scary, or that'll be cool. Like, there's also some jump scares that visually are really, really good. There's one that's like, you watch a VHS tape and someone's dead, but it's like they're the Blair Witch. It's like a Blair Witch style thing where they're facing the wall. You grab them, they're actually dead, and it's just really, really cool. There's also another scare with Jack actually in one of his first, well, or first or second, it can be either, of his stalking sections, albeit they're very short, of course, in which if you walk up to this wall, he can just absolutely smash through the wall. And this is actually missable. Most people would have seen this, I'm sure, because it's quite difficult to miss, but it is actually missable. But it is so cool to look at, and he can interact with the environment. I really, really like that. He can also smash tables and stuff. There's very few things he does interact with, but I think it's these little... I'm going to have them in the visuals section, but whether you count them as visuals, gameplay, they're just very cool. I like some of these jump scares. There's also a jump scare with Mia, which I think was foreshadowed really well. A lot of people, I've heard people actually say this jump scare is terrible because it comes out of nowhere, but it's actually foreshadowed beforehand. Like, you actually see her walking past creepily, and then when you go back, she like pops out. It wasn't foreshadowed perfectly. I wouldn't say it was the creme de la creme, but it's very, very solid. I liked it, and it's kind of creepy seeing her walk past. And I obviously wasn't scared because it's not my first time playing it, but if it was, I'd be scared that she's like somewhere.
Ethan, it's okay. It's okay, it's me. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. But you shouldn't have done that!
That being said, not every jump scare is great. Marguerite's jump scare in this section, it wasn't done super well. You can literally see her just spawn in out of absolutely nowhere, and I don't think it's particularly done very well. If they just changed that a little bit, made it hidden a bit more, then I feel like it would have been better. I mean, you do know Marguerite's around this section, so it's not like it comes out absolutely nowhere, but the fact that you can actually see like her spawn in if you're looking that way, and even if you're looking straight, you probably could. It's just, I feel like it could have been hidden a bit better, you know, like as if she's always been in that corner. Also, the dinner table scene, which if you've not seen in full, you should look it up. The dinner table scene with the whole family that introduces you to the Bakers. It's the first time Ethan's been introduced to them properly. I think is so cool. It's one of the best scenes or most memorable scenes in gaming to me. Like, I genuinely think this is such an amazing scene. It introduces you to Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and then the grandma, which turns out to be Evelyn later on in the game. However, it's such a cool scene, and genuinely, I think the game peaks at this moment. I think this is the part of the game which I generally think would be a 10 out of 10. It's such a good introduction to these characters. Now, I know I've heard people complain about the lack of enemy variety. Besides the main bakers that you fight, the other enemies are just, they're called moulded, but they're just like these black blobs, and you can get a few versions of them. There's the normal ones, and there's normal ones with like an axe hand, and then there's four-legged ones that are really fast but very weak, and then there's like big, I think they're called fat men, I don't know, but they're big, and they throw up on you or vomit on you, right? So there's like 4 or 5 types of these moulded, and yes, they are not particularly amazing when it comes to villains, but I think they're absolutely fine for the interludes. So they're fine in terms of like you fight Jack, but whilst you're building up to fight Jack, you've got these in your way, and then Marguerite the same. Although Marguerite's is more the bugs, but I do think the moulded are fine. There's not so many of them that it seems silly. I think they're fine. I do completely agree with their design. I feel like they're meant to be like mutated humans, but they were like failed human experiments. So unlike the Bakers, they were failed, I believe. At least that's my interpretation of it. That's the way I see it. I should know this because I played the game so many times. But I at the very least know they used to be human. So it would have been nice if you maybe saw like one of them had a human hand or one of them had a human face, or they were a bit more grotesque in that sense. Instead of just being a black amalgam, they could have actually like had some human parts that like maybe showed how they used to be human, and that would have been cool. Or maybe they could have like said, you know, like the zombies in Half-Life, where they like, if you reverse their tape, they're actually saying stuff. Maybe something like that, something that made them more unique. But overall, I don't think they're that bad. They could have been better, of course. They could have been designed better, but I think it was more the design that let them down, more than the actual, like, the type of enemies they are. I don't think enemy variety is that big a deal. I mean, I very rarely hear people talk about it in, like, Resident Evil 2 Remake, the enemy variety, when it's just zombies and Mr. X. Like, it's, you don't need loads of different enemies to make the game good, I don't believe, and in this case, I don't believe you do either. I don't think it's an enemy variety problem. I just personally think it's the enemy design that's a bit of an issue. It's not a big deal, and it doesn't ruin the game by any stretch, but I would prefer if they looked a bit better. And my least favourite part of, well, not the entire game, but we'll get into that, but one of my most least favourite parts of this game is the constant blood on your screen. There is a setting in the settings, right? So if your character gets injured, you have blood on your screen, and there's a setting in the settings, I don't know if it's just for the PS5 version or if it's for all versions, where you can turn off blood on your screen, or not turn it off completely, you can have it normal or less. So you can have a less amount or normal amount. I chose less, and I constantly had blood on my screen. The only way you do not have blood on your screen is if you're max health. So your health goes from green to yellow to red, and then you die. And you can check your watch. You've got a character's got a watch in his hand, and when he checks his inventory, he lifts up his watch, and it's a cool way to check your health, I suppose. But if you are in yellow, which isn't even red, you'll have this constant blood on your screen. If you're in green, you can even have the blood on your screen. It just depends how damaged you are, but still in the green. It is so annoying, and I had it on less blood, so I cannot imagine how it would be if you had it on normal blood. It is so annoying. There were times I'd generally be on green health, but I had blood on my screen, and I would heal just to get rid of the blood. And it was just wasting a healing item, but I just hated the blood on the screen, and it was constant. It's so annoying, and I have no idea. They literally have an option to have less blood. There should just be an option to have no blood. Like, I personally think the blood should only be there for your red health, but there should just be an option to have none on the screen. I feel like that'd be 10 times better, but it's whatever. Also going into the audio design, I think there's a few issues with this. There's an issue with the audio design with a Marguerite scare. There's like a scare with Marguerite where she like grabs a lantern, but the audio for the jump scare, like, oh, it's not even a jump scare, but the audio for the scare happens like around the player. And if you look up anyone's reaction to this scare, most like half the people, if not more, actually missed this like scare the first time playing because they would look around and they wouldn't actually look down in the crevice where Marguerite was. Like, it sounds like it's coming from like your level, not under you. That was a bit of poor sound design in my opinion. There's also a piano jump scare at a random section where you're walking through, it's actually Marguerite's section as well, but you're walking and then randomly you'll hear a piano start playing, and when you get close to the piano it just stops. A bit before you can see it, as if someone was playing the piano. It's such a terrible jump scare. Like, why would somebody be playing the piano? It's not creepy, it's just goofy. I don't know. Like, I think they were trying to make it creepy, like, oh, someone's playing the piano, but they're not anymore. Like, oh, who was playing the piano? But it's just goofy, and I don't particularly find it good. Although, for the most part, the sound design is very, very solid. The sound design in the house where you're walking around, when Mia is in the house, or when you're fighting Mia in the early sections of the game, in the guest house, in the main house with Jack, and most of the time with Marguerite, it's fine. But you could really hear good audio in the first maybe, from hour of the game maybe. Once you get to Marguerite's section, it instantly drops in quality, I believe, but it's still not bad. But they were just a few of the audio issues that I seem to have, which I just thought were a bit silly. That being said, I now want to talk about, and I've avoided this, and if you've played Resident Evil 7, you're probably a bit confused, but I've avoided it on purpose. We've now got the boat section. So this game is about 7 hours long, even if it's your first time playing. And, I mean, if it's not your first time playing, it'd be a lot quicker than 7 hours, but if it's your first time playing, it'll be about 7 or 8 hours or so. And about 2.5 maybe of those hours if it's your first time playing, maybe a bit less than that actually, but a good like 20-30% of the game is set in a boat. After you've made the stupid choice, you end up going to this boat, you see it for the first time, and when I see it for the first time, I just feel, well, not for the first time, after, I've played it multiple times, when I see it, I feel absolute dread, because the boat section is by far the worst section. I think it's the biggest downfall of any game, genuinely, I've ever played. Up until the boat section, you'd maybe give Resident Evil 7, at least I would, maybe like an 8 or 9 out of 10. Probably not a 10 out of 10, but it's a solid game, right? I really, really liked it. The boat section happens, it drops it by like 2 or 3 rankings. The boat section is so unbelievably... You basically just play Resident Evil 7 in a boat, but everything I said about Resident Evil 7, chuck out the window, besides maybe gameplay, but just chuck everything else out the window. Story, the visuals, the sound, I chuck everything out the window because the boat section is the opposite of all of them. It's so absolutely abhorrent, it's unreal. First off, the boat is bland and boring to look at. Nothing in the boat's unique. I've played this game about 20 times, and I still sometimes struggle to find my way around the boat section just because it's so boring to look at, and I haven't learnt the layout because I just don't want to. It's so boring to look at. It's so ugly, and not in a good way. It's not like, oh, it's creepy and ugly. No, it's just absolutely hideous to look at. Everything looks the same. The only enemies you fight are tons of molded, so it's kind of like more action-packed area of the game, but there's no more like Jack or Marguerite. There's no more big bosses like that. It's just molded, and it's so unbelievably boring. You have to play through it twice. You have to watch a VHS tape, and you actually control Mia in this section actually, and you have to watch a VHS tape which like shows you the events before, you know, the boat, because the boat crashed near the Baker estate, and that's how the Bakers got infected by Evelyn. But you have to watch a VHS tape that shows you the events just before that, and then you have to play it again in like the real world when the boat's more decayed and more decomposed, right? Which, by the way, in the normal VHS tape that has like shows you the boat before like it crashed and whatever, and as chaos was unfolding, it's so confusing to me because there's this huge boat. You see Mia, and she's also got a friend called, is it Alan, I think his name is? I don't know. There's her and Alan. There's nobody else on the boat. It's a huge boat. You go through like 4 or 5 floors of this boat, and there's not a single soul on the entire boat. There's a few of those molded creatures which we now know are like humans, like they are people. But there's not a single, there's like maybe like 5 or 6 corpses you can see of people. But that's it. There's not a single, like, you don't see but like it's stupid. Like, I don't get it. Like, surely this boat would have more workers on board. You maybe see 2 alive throughout the entire game, but they just instantly die. But you don't. But they're also in cutscenes. It's not like in gameplay. Like, I don't get it. Like, were Mia and this guy the only 2 people on this entire boat? It's just stupid. It also feels like it lasts forever. This section feels like it lasts more than the entire game combined, not including this section. Even though it isn't as long, it's just because it's so boring. It's so horrible to get through. Genuinely, there have been times about a year ago, I think it was, where I played Resident Evil 7. I got to the boat section and I dropped it. Like, literally, like I the only reason I didn't this time is because I was going to platinum it and I wanted to review it, and you have to play the whole game really if you're going to review it. Not, well, maybe not, but I personally like to. The story gets far worse in the boat section. The boat section is where it explains like, oh, Evelyn is a thing, you know, and it gets far worse then. So that's when Evelyn's really properly introduced. You have little hints towards her and you see little hallucinations of her up until that point, but you're actually properly explained who Evelyn is during this section. I absolutely hate it. Hate it. The story goes downhill from this section. The boat looks ugly, so the visuals go down. The sound design goes down because you just hear molded everywhere, and the boat's not particularly interesting just in any sense. You can also break the continuity for some reason. There's a laptop that at the start of the game, like Mia sends you a message on a laptop, which is why Ethan comes and finds it. Well, it's not the reason. She tells him to stay away, but he got a message, a separate message, which was probably from possessed Mia, but that's besides the point. But at the start of the game, Mia actually records a message for Ethan on a laptop, like it's literally the first thing you see in the game. However, in the boat section, you find that, like in the VHS, you find the laptop and you can record the message for Ethan, but you can actually just completely skip it, and it kind of breaks continuity, which is a bit silly. Like, I don't know, it's just a bit goofy. Like, they should have just, even though I'm a little bit happy because it doesn't mean we have to wait for another whole cutscene, which is about a minute or so long at least, but it does technically break continuity, and it's something that seemed like an oversight, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know, it just seems a bit silly. The boat section just makes everything. The only thing that maybe doesn't get worse during the boat section is gameplay, but even that kind of does, because it's more action-orientated, and I don't think Resident Evil 7 suits that more action-orientated, at least not in the boat section. However, the actual gameplay in terms of the shooting, in terms of the way you move around and stuff, it's still, you know, it's very similar to Resident Evil 7 normal, like very small stuff changes. You get a new weapon, which is a machine gun, which I failed to talk about when I was talking about weapons. I forgot it even existed because it's introduced during the boat section, which is abysmal. But yeah. And then after the boat section, you have a very brief, like 15-minute, maybe slightly longer, actually, maybe more like half an hour period where you're Ethan. Again, like Mia saves Ethan, and then you're Ethan again, who you have been for the majority of the game. And then you go to beat Evelyn, and you have the final Evelyn boss fight, and you go through some mines. And the mine section's quite boring as well. Like, everything after the boat section, I mean, it's a lot better than the boat section. The boat section's worse than the mines, in my opinion. But the mines are also, I mean, it's a very short part of the game, the mines, but it's very not great, I don't know, compared to the Baker estate, so it's just nowhere near as good. And then the final Evelyn, in quotes, boss fight, it's not a boss fight, it's the easiest thing ever, it's stupid. I hate it, it's terrible. So basically everything after the boat section is just 10 times worse than everything before. Like, as soon as the boat section happens, the game drops from like a 9 out of 10 to like a 6 out of 10. It's so Like, it's so bad, the boat section. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, drop-off from any game ever, from start to finish. It's so terrible. I was going to talk about the DLC, but I kind of decided not to because, you know, I'm just, I guess, not in the mood to play more Resident Evil 7. However, I did complete End of Zoe, which is one of the DLCs, and it completely ruins the story. I absolutely hate End of Zoe as a DLC. But I know Chris Redfield's got a DLC, Not a Hero, and I have played that before, but I haven't played it for this. And I haven't played all of the banned footage either, so I haven't played all the DLC for this, but I just can't be bothered going through it. I just want to talk about the main story, and yeah, tell me if you disagreed, agreed, and yeah, thank you.